Apothecary Diaries' main character, Maomao, is one of those singularly incredible, charming tour de force protagonists who are the soul and embodiment of their series. She is in that Lelouch, Yang Wenli space where you could drop this character wholesale into any setting, any plot, and I'm convinced that they would still work and thrive purely off of charisma, which is pretty incredible given that Apothecary's entire world is built to make Maomao shine. Maomao is a brilliant eccentric operating in a faux historical China with all of its requisite court intrigue, who is simultaneously able to act in concert with the palace etiquette while never losing herself in it, solving mysteries with her apothecary talents all the while. But the thing that has me in love with Apothecary Diaries is how it explores systems of power, not from the usual anime perspective of characters attempting to overthrow an unfair status quo or reign over it, becoming the hierarchy themselves, but how characters who are not in control operate in this world. There's plenty of other stuff to enjoy too. I can't imagine being as excited for a new episode every week without its subtle animation brilliances and perfect comedic timing, and we'll get there, but for me, I cannot pull my eyes away when watching Maomao operating in this world. It doesn't take long for Maomao's lack of power to be on display. Minutes into the first episode, she is kidnapped by 3 men who sell her to the Imperial Palace. Taking part of her paycheck for the years of service she now has to perform as a low-ranking handmaiden. And Maomao's reaction to this grave injustice is not to bemoan her fate or plan an escape, but rather to keep her head down and get through the years without drawing attention to herself. Literally, moments after being captured, she gives a weary sigh, like an old man finding out they're out of their favorite snack. She describes it as an annoyance. This is a character who is aware of the systems of power. She is a realist and recognizes that as a young female commoner in a world with an emperor, she is the bottom of the totem pole. And even in the rear palace, which is for the many concubines that the emperor has taken, there's an internal power structure here too, with the concubines tier listed, because, of course, directly in relation to their favor from the emperor, and then their ladies-in-waiting falling under them, and eventually getting to Maomao as a handmaiden who is pretending she cannot read, and we'll chat about that in a moment, effectively the lowest ranked person in the rear palace hierarchy. But the story isn't interesting if she doesn't have to interact with high-status folks, so Maomao's stay-out-of-sight plan falls apart, as she's both a touch too brilliant and too good of a person to ignore people whose health is at risk, eventually becoming one of the top 4 concubines lady-in-waiting. And that brings us to the fun bits, because Maomao is at her absolute best when she's manipulating the palace structure to her benefit. My absolute favorite example of it is when Maomao uses a bunch of her contacts both inside the palace and at one of the top tier brothels that she assisted with back home to convince a soldier to take her home for a few days, playing an information battle where he believes she has other high-ranking officials who she can offer her letters of introduction to instead. Match that up with some of the best sound editing you'll hear all year, and that's how Apothecary can get you howling with laughter. Maomao often takes advantage of her role to acquire things she otherwise cannot have, drinks and aphrodisiacs for 2, because at the end of the day, Maomao is simply obsessed with drugs and poison, and any chance to partake is a good one for her. But honestly, for the most part, Maomao's lack of power helps to inform us about her character. There's this really thoughtful scene where Maomao is explaining why she actively makes herself less attractive. Freckles are considered a negative in this society, and it's because living in a red light district, there's always the chance that she could be jumped by some unsatisfied and diseased brothel customer. The visuals are as clear as they can be in this scene, a large foot crushing flowers under heel. This is a world where a young woman like her has to get street smart fast or pay the price. When talking about how she was forced into service, she monologues about how she lied about her ability to read so that her captors wouldn't get more money, even though that means she's on laundry duty. Again, the bottom of the totem pole. Staying out of sight means that she isn't at risk of being beheaded by a noble simply because of the smallest mistake. Maomao develops a good relationship with Jinshi, the master of the rear palace, and the foreshadowing could not be heavier in regard to his real position, or I should say I assume, I'm not a source reader, and yet she never mistakes their places in the hierarchy for a second, telling him in a scene prefaced by an overwhelming blood red that she is a commoner whose life can be taken away in an instant, and that he is the one who would give that order. Is it any wonder why Maomao is a realist, who seems to expect the worst of people in power, who can only sigh when someone places their will above her own? I keep coming back to episode 4 of the show in my head because Maomao's life is literally on the line if she cannot bring one of the top 4 ranked concubines, Lihua, back to health on orders from the emperor. And yet when faced with her ladies-in-waiting bullying her and refusing to let Maomao work, she simply accepts that. She remakes the food only to be kicked out again, even thinking to herself, at this rate, she'll be beheaded. It isn't until Jinshi gives her some of his own authority that she's able to get in the room and deduce the problem. One could point to the following scene, where Maomao smacks the handmaiden who knowingly was poisoning Lihua and drags her around in an impressively animated and storyboarded sequence as textual evidence of her utilization of force, wordlessly approved by and with Jinshi's borrowed authority in the room to save her own life by making the point, "This is the Emperor's will," crystal clear. You can also read it as Maomao's belief in justice, her desire to save people, and her frustration with intentional ignorance since Jinshi had ordered all of this poisonous makeup removed from the palace. I think in some ways it's both. It's not like Maomao had foregone trying to figure out a way to have Lihua's handmaidens let her in the room. Jinshi just happened to offer himself to her before she had to figure something else out. There is obviously some element of Maomao's backstory in play here as well. Flashbacks to an annex in the brothel are littered throughout the show so far, which might also explain the less than calculated rage Maomao goes into. You might say that I'm off base. Apothecary Diaries is not really focused on power, but I'd argue it isn't even just Maomao. Episode 3 points out the inherent powerlessness of even the highest ranked concubines. When concubine Fuyo leaves the palace, and you can check my short about the direction here, by being sent off as a reward to a soldier, something that we are left to intuit she wanted by intentionally avoiding the Emperor's gaze, Gokuyo, one of the top 4 concubines, says she's envious of Fuyo, presumably getting to be with the one she loves. We don't know this for certain at this point, but Gokuyo probably had no choice but to become the Emperor's concubine. And even if I'm wrong about that, we're all but told explicitly that that's the case for Fuyo. So in regard to these decisions of partnership, they have no autonomy. We never see a concubine leave the palace. They might as well be prisoners in this garden. Gyokuyo's power, as little of it as actually exists, only exists because of the Emperor's authority, and he is clear to assert that by telling Maomao to save Lihua in front of Gokuyo, giving orders to her lady-in-waiting. Episode 10 also makes clear how the internal politics between the consorts is so fraught. Lihua talking about trying to beat Gyokuho in episode 4, Gyokuho invites Lishu over for tea, and the whole event is purely to acquire information in a political battle. Maomao suspects that one of the concubines, ladies-in-waiting, is attempting to kill one of the other top 4 so that her master isn't expelled from the palace. It's so baked into this world that we don't even think about it as an audience, or we wouldn't if not for Maomao directly comparing the inner palace and the red light district as cages that poison everyone in them, trapping them. The small petty power struggles between ladies in waiting of the high-ranked concubines and the slightly more significant struggles between their masters are the same as the status of being a top-tier woman in one of the brothels. Because whether you're a top 4 concubine or one of the 3 heavenly ladies, when listening to Maomao's reasoning, both lack freedom to choose, which seems to be the true power. Like this visual of the courtesan trapped in slowly closing bars that compress her space and looking out at free-flying birds, it doesn't leave a lot to the imagination. And then she explicitly gets referred to as merchandise. Apothecary is filled with great directional moments like this. It comes through even in the mystery writing with foreshadowing. During the garden party, we see Lishu third, so that we are hinted at the trend line where concubines and escorts match in similar colors, and then she comes in shattering that trend before returning to standard with the final of the top 4. This becomes foundational evidence in Maomao's deduction regarding a poisoning, which happens because, obviously, there's a power struggle between even the top-ranked consorts, and, as a small tangent, Lishu is bullied by her handmaidens because she is too young to realize that she's being fed bad advice, and those individuals feel empowered to do so by a society that tells women not to remarry, even though Lishu was taken as a literal child by the Emperor's father. The critiques of this society and its power systems are so obvious that the show doesn't even feel the need to point them out beyond just pure statement of facts. I mention the bullying because it leads to Lishu, who has an allergy to fish, being forced to eat it when her food tester swaps her bowl for one with the fish still in. The problem is that she cannot say anything in front of the Emperor as this is his favorite dish, and not finishing it would be a quick way into his bad graces, and he is the embodiment of power in this society. Therefore, Lishu has to harm herself. Even the mysteries are built around these power dynamics, and I find it nice because, for me, otherwise the mysteries are a bunch of what evidence will Maomao know that the audience doesn't, like in the first and second mystery, or how will Maomao discover what the audience already knows, like in episode 9's first mystery. So it's been nice to see how these mysteries both build our knowledge of the cast, like how episode 4 develops a different side of Lihua, and the structure of the society and world, and how those elements further influence our characters. On the off chance that you're still watching this video, despite not being convinced by my argument, hey, I really appreciate that. And now I'm going to kind of just gush for a little bit about a bunch of other stuff that I like about this show, because Apothecary is just a special kind of story. For starters, the production is outstanding. I really love the way Apothecary Diaries handles its lighting and coloring. It's a rich palette with dramatic shadows to highlight characters and tension, while still always showing off the opulence of the rear palace. And the shot sequencing is great, mixing up angles and timing to build to satisfying conclusions, or maximizing a comedic bit, which is understating, because I don't think I've laughed harder with a show all year. Maomao becomes Meow Meow at the drop of a hat, gets thrown out of a palace like a cartoon character, tingles with excitement at the idea of consuming poison. This little gremlin is far and away my favorite character in years, and if she yells, "With these hands," she'll become my #1 apothecary in fiction, period. The shift in art style when it does happen always feels perfect. Playing up Jinshi's shock at a misunderstanding by counterposing the slow-mo drop of a cup with the childish drawing had me crying laughing about as much as Gokuho. There is this great balance of Maomao, who is hyper-competent and wicked smart, but also overconfident, and who makes assumptions that result in hilarious consequences. The small touches in animation are incredible. We already mentioned episode 4, and these character designs, I mean, there's a reason the ladies-in-waiting lose their mind over Jinshi. The sound ain't no slouch either. There's been a lot of hullabaloo made about Kevin Penkin, Satoru Kosaki, and Arisa Okehazama all being attached to this project, and I'll be the first to tell you that the instrumentation and soundtrack usage has been great. But I have to shout out the sound editing. Every sound effect feels perfect, the Foley brings you into the world seamlessly, and it often does the heavy lifting in the comedy. There have been a few nice insert songs. Episode 3's montage ends with a beautiful vocal performance that feels right at home in the audioscape, which is what you'd expect from Made in Abyss and Beastar's composers, but I'm still waiting for a Gravity/Many Stories track to just blow me away. At the end of the day, Maomao is far and away my favorite character this year, and honestly in recent memory, because she is so much fun to root for and watch operate in this world. Somehow, the audience gets both the eccentric, who does her own thing, and the utterly competent, understands her role, court lady at the same time, all the while cracking jokes with impeccable timing. Apothecary Diaries has lived up to the hype, and with a world this engaging and a cast who are perfectly suited to it, it continues to delight and surprise in ways that only truly great stories can.